Barbarian buffs are here. Are we saved, or is it still looking pretty grim? We're going to go over everything they just talked about in the campfire live stream they just did, and there's a lot to unpack here, so let's get into it. What up, team? What you about? MurderInc here, talking about Barbarian. They said they felt weak, so they wanted to give us something here. Let's just dive straight into it here. So I have some screenshots that I copy and pasted, put onto this document here. They did something that I wasn't expecting, although I probably should have expected it. They focused a lot, and I mean a lot, on the early game for Barbarians, which I get it. That's where the majority of players are, and they don't really stick around to the late game, but it would have been nice to see more. I don't want to spoil too much, so let's just get into what we see on the screen here. We have Bash, Fury gain from 11 to 13, Flay 10 to 13, Frenzy, Fury gain 2 to 3, Lunging Strike 10 to 12. This may seem small, because it is small. They tried to say we don't want to make it too big because percentages are scary, but this is a very small change. Now, double swing damage increase from 40 to 50%. This is pretty big. So double swing's already pumping. The thing is, it's slow. You have a small hitbox. Ideally, you steel grasp and you drag everything into it. You double swing and do tons of damage here. So that's interesting for sure. Rupture damage. This could be spicy. 45 to 70% increase. There may be something there for a Rupture build. Not going to work very well with the Barber, unfortunately, because Rupture is kind of like an execute bleed thing, and the Barber doesn't let you bleed anything. So it is what it is on that. Charge, enhanced charge damage increase from 30 to 60%. This is okay. I don't think it's going to do much, but we'll have to test it out in game. Next, Mighty Charge, vulnerable from 2 to 4 seconds. This is rather big. But the thing is, when you charge something, you're running through and by the mobs and then knocking them around. So, I don't know, 2 seconds was useless before because you had to get back in range of everything you just applied vulnerable to. 4 seconds gives you more room for sure, but we're going to have to see how in fact this plays out. So before I move on here, the thing is, I specifically made a leveling build that feels really good, especially with Rage, and it's with Rend. Now, I understand that not everyone likes the Rend gameplay. My only issue is I don't think this fixed enough for early game. Yes, the basic skills doing more Fury gen is going to be good. There was one build that I never mentioned in my testing that used 2 or 3 basic attacks in it. Now, that sounds pretty bad, and it felt pretty bad, but it was viable. You got tons of Fury gen by using 3 basic abilities. So is this going to make it so we only need 2 of those basic abilities now, and we can incorporate other force skills into the mix? Possibly, making us less reliant on our shouts. 2 shouts are ideal in most cases, but maybe we can drop 1 and just use 1 shout, which would be challenging shout. So we'll have to see how this plays out. I'm looking forward to, I'll probably do it towards the end of the season and making some type of new leveling build that doesn't use Ren, because I know there are a lot of players that don't like Ren, but like I said, Ren's just so OP because it refunds Fury. I thought for sure, like for sure, they were going to add some of the branch off points like upheaval. If they made upheaval refund Fury without having to crit, just if upheaval hits 3 or more targets, it now refunds, let's just say 20% of the Fury that it costed. That would make it a really good leveling build. And they clearly were focused on early game when they made a lot of these changes. I don't understand the double swing buff. I really don't, because it was already strong and it wasn't something that needed to be buffed, but that's whatever. So now let's go ahead onto the second part of the buffs here. If violent upheaval damages at least 2 enemies or a boss, that was the main change, you can berserking for 2 seconds, increased to 3 seconds if it damages at least 4 enemies. So they just added the boss interaction here. This is so small. I don't know why they made this change. Who's running an upheaval build at the moment besides for fun? Because it's a for fun thing. I'm not going to say it's not viable, but it's still very weak compared to the other options here, and this doesn't do it justice. They should have buffed the damage. That's what we were all really hoping for here. Next, we have passive changes, aggressive resistance, damage reduction increase from 3% to 4%, extra DR, sure, we'll take it. Gushing wounds, this one was kind of big. Bleed damage dealt based on crit damage increased from 100 to 115%. That's kind of small, but overpowering increase from 11 to 70. 11 to 70. That's big. Now we just need a better way to overpower, because our current options are not great. They're okay, but they're not great. So this could be interesting. They talked about overpower a lot on the stream. I did leave early because they were kind of rambling at some point, but that's irrelevant and it is what it is. Next, we have unconstrained berserking damage bonus increased from 25% to 35%. The problem is this is additive, so this is still a bad keystone. Updated the tooltip to more clearly reflect the key passive's value. Sure. Walking Arsenal, this is a good change. Bonus damage duration increased from 6 to 8 seconds. I noticed this a lot, where 7 seconds, maybe they know this too, but I'm going to tell you right now, 7 seconds is where a lot of the builds, you need that 7-second mark, and they made it to 8. So this is a good change, because the way Walking Arsenal works is you have to use one of each type of weapon, two-handed mace, two-handed slashing weapon, and the one-handed weapons. Once you have all of them and you use them, you get a timer. So if you use your bludgeon weapon, you have 8 seconds of a buff. If you use the two-handed slashing, which is a sword, polearm, or axe, you get another 8-second buff on a timer. And then you use your one-handed, you get another 8-second buff. Once you get all 3 of them, you get an additional powerful buff. Well, I should say a more powerful buff for having all of those active, which becomes the Walking Arsenal. So this is a good change. It's, even though it may seem small, it's just 2 seconds. 2 seconds is going to be enough to make it feel a lot better across the board. The next thing we have are going to be the legendary aspect changes for the Barbarian. Aspect of Ancestral Force, 32 to 50 to 40 to 58. I don't know how big this is. This is going to be much bigger for early game. Again, I think this is their focus again, then it's going to be for late game. They said they wanted to scale late game things up, but what they talked about were, and we can go over this a bit more later, but they talked about scaling up things like Dust Devils, anything that has a flat value to it. So proccing a barrier, they want to make that more viable. Dust Devil damage, another example. And they really need to look at the Call of the Ancients, because it's really strong early on, but in endgame it's useless. And if they just buff the damage of that, so it increases better with our player level, Ancestral Force could be really, really strong. Next, we have the Death Wish aspect. Thorns increase from 0.5, 0.75 to 0.65 and 0.85. Whatever. I don't really play with Thorns, so I can't speak to that. Unrelenting Fury. The cost to refund increased from 1020 to 2030. Additional functionality. This is good. Core refund also granted when hitting bosses. That's a good change. That's one good change. They realized what they were doing was wrong. Next, we have Ancestral Charge aspect. This is the new one added to the game. The damage is a joke. It's bugged. Sometimes it's not working. So they increased it by 25% across the board in the low end and the high end. Again, we're going to have to see this change with the change to charge. Damage increase from 30 to 60. If it's going to be viable at all, I will say this. It's a fun aspect to use. So I'm going to give them credit where credit is due. This is a fun aspect to use. Next thing, we have Burning Rage. Damage increased. Again, this is another, I believe this is a flat damage where it does fire damage when you're berserking. We'll have to see what these final numbers turn out to be. Next thing is going to be Earthquakes. From leaping and from using Stomp, damage reduction increased from 5. Okay, so pretty much it increased 10% there, but the big one is Earthquake aspect, something that I've used a lot. War Stomp, Ground Stomp in a lot of my Whirlwind builds. I use this aspect. Getting a 10% additional multiplicative multiplier is really good. It's going to increase our damage, and this is the issue, and I'll talk about it now because it doesn't get any better. They didn't fix the core issue of Whirlwind. A lot of builds have their clear strengths and weaknesses, and the weaknesses aren't that bad. Like Hammer the Ancient's weakness is it's slow. Double Swing weakness is it's slow and has a short range. They definitely could have increased the range there. Bleeds, they're underwhelming and they buff the bleed damage. Whirlwind, however, has negative single target damage. They didn't touch that anywhere here, which I'm really shocked about. Yes, we got a damage bonus if you're doing certain Whirlwind builds that I have played around with, using Ground Stomp, which is definitely very strong, but they didn't increase their single target at all, which was really, really disappointing. That should have been like a no-brainer thing to do. So the next thing they did was they buffed some of our uniques, Fields of Crimson, damage increased from 0.18 to 0.2, damage that enemies take while standing in pools increased from 15 to 20, small boost. Their rupture cooldown affix replaced with bonus critical strike damage. That could be big, especially with the new crit damage scaling of Gushing Wounds. Next we have Hellhammer, damage increase, rather small, burning duration increased from 3 to 4 seconds, damage to crowd control affix replaced with bonus critical strike damage. So they're understanding that they threw on these garbage substats onto the uniques, and it made them not as desirable. Now this is the one thing that I will say is going to help Whirlwind a lot. Ramaldanis magnum opus. Physical damage affix replaced with vulnerable damage. That's massive. The build was already like slightly below the 2-handed mace. This just might make the magnum opus one-handed version of Whirlwind surpass the two-handed with this one change here. It might sound small, but replacing additive damage on this weapon with multiplicative damage is massive, and it already pumps and does a lot of damage. So I'm excited about this. This is one good change for Whirlwind. Small buff to our single target. It's just going to be more damage overall for this build, but exciting nonetheless. Next we have 1,000 steps. We'll see how interesting this is. Attacks reduce evades cooldown replaced with bonus evade charges. That's a no-brainer. That was very smart. And damage against stun affix replaced with bonus movement speed. This one's okay, because usually you're going to use this in leap builds, and you're already pretty fast if you're leaping everywhere. So I think you might have wanted the damage to stunned, and they could have replaced something else. I don't know all of the modifiers offhand, but I feel like that was a weird one to replace with movement speed. Next we have Battle Trance. Basic skill damage affix replaced with cooldown reduction. Massive. Bonus attack speed to other skills increased from 10 to 20 to 35 to 45. This is major. Cooldown is paramount for pretty much every single build, and the fact that they added it to Battle Trance, we could be seeing this in some builds. This definitely like raised my eyebrows a bit, because considering using this, the Battle Trance, it's possible builds have made it work, but the fact that it didn't have cooldown and we're so reliant on shouts made it not as strong. Now we're gonna have to be fishing, of course, because cooldown reduction, there's going to be a range it can roll, and you're going to want the highest roll possible, and you can't re-roll the stats on unique. So there's a lot to be done here. I'm interested with this, and we do have to talk about one thing before we go on with all of these changes, because there's one like caveat to this. So let me just slide this in here, because this is something that I kind of wrote down. So we're going to have to refarm things with changes to substats, but not for the effect. What does that mean? So if we go back to this list here, any effect listing, so pretty much like, okay, the magnum opus, it has a modifier to damage in the bottom that's 0.1 to 0.3%. If they change that effect anywhere on here, that would automatically update with the uniques we currently have. What isn't going to change is if we have physical damage on a current Ramaldanis magnum opus, it's going to stay there after this comes in. Why they did that, I'm not sure. It's just going to make us have to refarm it. If we want vulnerable on the magnum opus, it is what it is. Now, the next thing they didn't talk about, they said they want to do on top of what they're doing now, is they want to start buffing ultimates that deal damage. I briefly talked about Call of the Ancients, how it doesn't scale well. The same thing with Iron Maelstrom. You can get it to scale well, but you need like 810 or 815 IP weapons across the board to make Iron Maelstrom do a ton of damage. So they're looking into buffing ultimate damage, because they've noticed that players are just taking things like, I'll just type this, and this means Wrath of the Berserker. They understand that players, not just for Barbarians, but for all of the classes, are looking at things that are buffing the class and the player, rather than things that are dealing damage, because it's just not scaling as well into the late game. So they recognize that, they do want to kind of approach that. Now, the general unique items. Temerity is getting buffed. It's replacing all stats with max life. Barrier is now going to be based on your maximum life, which is a massive change. And it's now probably accounted by conditions checking for the player having a barrier, which means conceded for Barbarian specifically is going to work with Temerity. Now, the question is, and the issue with Temerity has always been, it's been good early on, but it's never been good like at the end of mid game into late game and end game. It's never been good. Despite what a lot of the guides have said, Temerity's never been good, because what you lose in substats, damage reduction, armor, you cannot compete with those substats when looking at Temerity. Now that might change a bit, because now it's based off of max life, you're getting an additional max life roll, and it's properly scaling with things like conceded. So we're going to have to test this and see how it ends up playing out, especially with the nerf to damage reduction across the board. It's still going to be a hard sell, I'm going to be honest with you, because losing damage reduction and armor and just adding life, we're going to have to calculate the specific numbers to see what we're losing and what we're gaining when we do get this much larger barrier and max life on top of it. And if this is good enough to let us not have to take Iron Skin. I don't know if that's going to be the case, because the Iron Blood aspect that gives us damage reduction while we have Iron Skin active is really strong, but maybe if we can save an aspect slot on top of using Temerity, it'll be worth it, but that remains to be seen. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the density changes. This is an example of a current dungeon. I think Nostrava is the name of it. This is what the density looks like now, and then this is what the density is going to look like. So this is a direct buff to the Whirlwind build, because as I showed in my last video, when you're fighting elites, because our single target is so bad, you always want to be dragging them to other mobs. This is going to make that much easier, especially if you have the Barber Malignant Heart. So this is going to be a good change for sure here. And just a few other notes to make. Guaranteed legendary starting at level 35 from bosses and Legion events. This is going to make this much easier for the seasons to come. Treasure goblins starting at level 15. Guaranteed legendary item drop chance. Respec cost is going to be reduced by 40%. Extra stash tab is being added for 400,000 gold. Okay, so this is an important one. They're removing 3 affixes from all Nightmare Dungeon tier maps. Resource Drain is gone, which is good because we can never run that. Cold Enchanted is gone, and Backstabber is gone because they were unplayable. I mean, Cold Enchanted for Barbarians, we don't really care because we have the best Unstoppable in the game by far. We have so many options and we're never getting CC'd. In fact, if you've done leveling to 100, whether it's in Eternal or in Season 1, or you're slowly going to 100, and you're a Barbarian, you know you spend half of your runs reviving other players because they're not Barbarians and they're not tanky enough, so it is what it is. So right now, the last thing we're going to talk about is August 2nd is when the official patch notes are coming, because they have the caveat of they can still tune numbers from what we've seen here today. Underwhelming overall, yes, but the numbers can still be tuned. They did say, however, about 90% of it, they're pretty set in stone on, but maybe they can add something. I don't know, we'll have to see when it is, but August 8th is going to be when the patch goes live, so we do have some time, and I guess there's some small copium that they do other changes here, but let me know what you guys think. That's what I read so far, what I saw, and give me your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Is Barbarian back? Not that it's ever been truly dead. A lot of people just overreacted. The Barber specifically made every class strong, but Barbarians, Whirlwind specifically, extremely powerful. So give me your thoughts and feedback. If you enjoyed this content, smash that like button, subscribe with the notification bell, and I'll see you all in the next upload.